I believe Astrid and Juhan can do a much better job at introducing themselves than I can introducing them. So if you could both just tell a little bit about who you are and why you're participating in the panel today. Sure. I already have a mic, so I'll just
Can you hear me okay?
Awkwardly hand mine.
Hi, I'm Astrid Chow. I'm the principal product designer at a healthcare startup called Eleanor Health. We focus on addiction medicine and mental health. Before that, I did a quick layover at CVS Aetna, and before that I was actually at IBM Watson Health. So AI is definitely something that I'm very passionate about. So I'm really excited to be.
Thank you. Hi, Astrid. Hi, I'm Juhan. I actively screw up U.S. healthcare on a weekly basis. By being a designer, I'm a reformed engineer who's gone to the dark side of design. And I do that by designing healthcare software and policy at a design studio in the Republic of Arlington, Massachusetts, called GoInvo. We are a representative democracy in Arlington. We have town meeting. Like many of the 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts. I'd highly recommend just looking at that. But I also teach at a venture capital firm, a $25 billion venture capital firm called MIT.
Thank you both. I want to just start the panel, and when I keep doing this, I'm just making sure we're staying on time. It's not that I'm not paying attention. I want to go back to the theme of what this symposium is. The part of the impetus and inspiration for it was Douglas Copeland's book Generation X, which is really a story about people trying to find their relevance in the world. That's really essentially what it is at that particular time. And if I can just speak for myself, I'm still absolutely trying to figure that out. I can't go on LinkedIn without getting heart palpitations. It's one of these things where I just feel like I am bombarded by answers. Answers. Some of them are good, some of them aren't, most of them I don't know. And I think just stepping back from the AI discussion, we'll get there and that'll be fun. I want to talk a little bit more about what the human experience has been like for the both of you, in particular in the last few years. I did a panel once with Juhan in 2017, and it was packed. It was awful. No, it was really great. And the theme of that, and Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, the theme of that was the emerging designscape of Boston, the emerging designscape. And so we had all these plans and these predictions, and then life happened as it inevitably does. And I think over the last 5 years, we've just experienced something as, that we didn't predict, right? And for me, speaking personally, it was such a human experience that we almost didn't know how to do it, at least from my own perspective. Well, I really loaded up this panel, didn't I?
Great.
So, Astrid, if we can start with you. If we think back to the last 5 years, again, trying not to go into the AI discussion yet.
Okay.
What has this experience been like? What has changed? What were you prepared for? What were you not prepared for?
So it's interesting having, I'm sure you had the same, but having worked in healthcare. So when the pandemic hit, I was at Watson Health and we were doing a lot of different projects. But one of them actually was a digital health pass to actually work with vaccination status. So it was actually kind of amazing to be working on something that was like so immediate. But at the same time, there were just so many questions. So I think one of the things that I'm really hopeful this will continue is the design industry and tech industry is just people bringing their authentic selves. I think that's been brought up several times. But just the fact that, we're all remote or people had to shift to remote, and that was really challenging, especially if you're doing design workshops, design thinking workshops. How do you even do that? People have Zoom fatigue. How do you engage people? It's really, really challenging. And I think, designers are very well set up to talk about those things. One of the things that I think was really exciting that's come up more and more is, I don't know, people probably know Humanity Centered. They've been running a lot of different workshops on organizational trauma, things like that. Like all of us went through a humongous trauma when everything shut down and not knowing for years. And that, I think, if you speak to like that human condition, that shared human condition, being in environments where you can talk about that is really so critical.
Right. And, and Juhan, just take it off from here. It's, you can't just turn the lights back on, right? I mean, this idea of, well, pandemic's over, back to work. What? What's it been like for you? What in the last 5 years, what's changed? What did you predict that happened?
Well,
what didn't happen?
Well, I didn't predict anything, but if you look at it in terms of evolution, on the scale of planetary evolution, not much has happened. Okay, so I mean, just in terms of the scale,
So what are you feeling?
Grown a tail, or shit like that hasn't happened. So in time, though, if you look very hyper locally to the past, I think maybe decade, other than like prices have gone up, although the price for design has maybe not gone up as much as everything else. That should tell you something about the overhypeness of design. The grift has increased by exponential rates. Ethics as situationally optional has now gone into hyperdrive. I think the technical rigor of design and engineering has gone down. So I'm just giving you maybe my decade of BS, what's happened there. I think the chaos is slightly increased, although it's just because we have a bigger megaphone for it. There's always been chaos. There's always been uncertainty. Some people thrive in it, some people don't. But I think it's just because we have a much higher resolution lens on it, is that we can see a lot more bullshit. And that, I think, also then infects us somehow, that we become either more arrogant, which can hurt projects, or you can become more apathetic, which kills projects. So I think there's this way of looking at things which can really hurt how we drive goodness in the world.
Well, and how do we do that? What's the positive spin on that? I'm going to go a little off script here. Sorry. So if there are these negative consequences, what do we do from here? Here we are in 2023. And again, when I say that, looking for relevance, that's just me. I don't know if anyone else feels that way kind of as you're going through this landscape. That's how I feel. So where do we find the goodness? Again, not talking about AI, what is one of the things we can do, whether we're remote, whether we're hybrid, whether we're back in the office? What can we do?
Asking me.
I'm asking you, and then I'm going to ask Astrid the same question.
Okay, there's a fundamental designer-engineer trait of making things. If you don't abandon that, if you continue to make things, that's how you change, by shipping something, and that shipping something then impacts other people. So if you stop the making gene in you, that, I think, really cuts down on your ability to make change. So I just worry that there's this, was it dance party maneuver? I forgot what you called it. A planning party, right? Which I know you said in jest. And that has infected, as like a disease, the design skill. If we still don't make things, then what the frick? And I think that's I think that is something that is like its own pandemic inside of our small tribe of designers. So I mean, that's the one thing. It's like you got to keep that going.
Astrid, what are your thoughts on this? What's the one good thing we can do here in 2023?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not a new thing, and it's going to be an obvious thing, but just continuing to be like that advocate for the things that we know need to happen in terms of change. Like, we are absolutely change agents. That is our, at least I feel like that's our ethos and that's our superpower. So being able to be out there and bringing, truth and voices of our audiences and also even just ourselves is such a hugely powerful thing.
Right. And this brings us to AI. For me, one of the things, just to piggyback on this a little bit, is and we do this in our own research at Woods, is asking questions more than providing answers. That has been something that's been very empowering, for us. and for our clients. And then when you look at, as we go into, I think, a very unpredictable time, especially with AI, for me, a lot of it still seems very opaque. A lot of it still seems AI, here we go, learn it or else. What? I don't know what's going on. So I'm wondering, just in terms of specificity, I think this is important, to really talk about how you're using AI, if at all. Specifically, what are the good things about it? What are the not so good things about it in your role, to the degree that you're both comfortable talking about that? And Astrid, we can start with you here. How can we make sure that it's inclusive? This is something that we hear AI do this, but wait a minute, there's a lot that we've been learning the last few years. How can we apply these learnings to AI? Completely loaded question, but how are you using it? Okay, go for it.
So going a little bit back just to how I even got into AI, my focus and interest has always been in like behavior change and activation and things like that, especially in healthcare. And also trying to give, we call our users members, giving members, empowering them to feel like they can actually look at their health as something that's theirs and not just something that's like put upon them. So, having done some behavior change and things like that, realizing immediately that I need to understand AI and data and what that actually took. So that took me to a bunch of places, but one of them being IBM Watson. And one of the things, not to be a plug for IBM, but one of the things that, developing there was just a perspective on what is the role of AI? Where is it an appropriate application? I always describe to, the clinicians I work with, the caseworkers I work with, that my own idea of how technology should play a part is to help them find more time with members. So really, technology should really only be amplifying and maximizing the human-to-human connection. And that, I think, can really help us understand what's an appropriate usage for AI. So there are lots of scary examples that, unfortunately, a lot of them also happen because of data sets that were either incomplete, not correct, extremely biased, which is where inclusivity comes in. We really need to have all parties represented at the table when we're actually looking at these data sets, training the models. Those are really key things. But there are also really great opportunities. So one of the hackathon ideas that we did at our company, which I was sharing with others, is, how do we use generative AI for art therapy? That could be a really fantastic thing with oversight from therapists. But, lowering that barrier to, one of our members starting to be creative and create art, that's a humongous thing because it's so hard for a lot of our members to even get with help in therapy. So if there is a tool that can help them feel like, oh, I can dabble in this, I think those are really promising applications.
And in your role, do you ever see it misused, or do you ever see it in the, I don't want to use that here. I don't think that's a good usage.
Yes, I think any time where there are specific conversations that need to be had human to human, we really need to be careful. So I know at one point, leveraging chat for therapy can work for certain things. Some people are more inclined to disclose if they don't think it's too human. However, that needs to be very clear that they're talking to a chatbot, right? And I know early on there were some cases where, it wasn't clear, but always being transparent about it, I think is really, really key. And then also, of course, having sort of the triage option of talk to a human. One of the things I used to joke when chatbots became super big was automated calls when, we would call up customer support and you'd be like, human being, let me talk to a human being. A lot of these chatbots are essentially the same thing. You're just zero, human, 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 human. And all of these chatbots, at least a couple of years ago, were being just put out there without sort of that idea of what if someone needs to talk to someone?
Right.
What happens?
Yeah, and Juhan, one of the things that strikes me, and I don't want to know exactly, how you use AI in your day-to-day as well. Where is it useful? Where is it not? But one of the things too, it would be helpful, I think both you thought a little bit about, I'm not sure everyone, maybe here we do, but I'm not sure everyone really knows what AI even is in terms of the general public. Here we are saying, well, it's got to do this. This is the benefit. This is the disadvantage. I think a lot of people they just hear AI, or they may hear about it if they watch 60 Minutes and still don't really have a comprehension of what it is, which I think is maybe a big challenge. But Juhan, thinking of that thematically, but also how you use it, benefits, disadvantages, what general thoughts in your role?
Oh, God. I use it all the freaking time. So I use it daily, meaning I use ChatGPT freaking 4 to 6 times a day easily. That's not a lot, but I ask it questions just like was previously said, hey, I didn't think about that. It is a fantastic tool to use in meetings in real time. Now, the references it sometimes makes things up, but all that's going to get better and better and better over time. To think that we're in this stuck of it's only going to be, it's never going to reference anything, or it's never going to be ultimately referenceable. That's going to change. The speed of how it's changing is insane. It's breaking like power laws. So I want you to think about how many flops right now. It's 100 million. It's going to be 1 trillion by the end of this year. That's
1 trillion what?
Flops. How many operations per second that machines are calculating and doing the longitudinal or side-to-side explanations or interrogations of the data. That's an insane jump. And it was tens of thousands just 5 years ago. So it's breaking Moore's law. That's crazy buns. So where am I going with this? I don't know. But the idea that it's going to stay the same is wrong. What's happening at OpenAI, which is one of the bigger companies out there, which used to be mostly open source, which I think is really important. I am an open source zealot. They recently closed GPT-4. I don't know if you noticed that, right? Do people know why they closed it? I don't, but do you have any guesses? I have a guess. Privatization? They're still private and making money before in GPT-3. In fact, GPT-3 was the fastest adoption on the planet at any surface. Netflix would have taken a decade to get a couple million. Google, the same order of magnitude. 2 months, 100 million people, active users.
Who are the users, though? I know it's a completely loaded question, but is it? Who's adopting this?
Oh, mostly technocratic, but right now. But so there's a ton. There's a ton of people. There's everybody. 100 million? You don't think a lot of different people are using it? But I mean,
I know, but that's my concern. It's AI. And you're right. I mean, the rate of adoption and the exponential growth is profound. But what is that cohort? Who's using this? Who is providing the data for AI to then give us guidance? Is that a concern of yours, Astrid?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Because, as we know that, the technological divide of accessibility is humongous, and we're still working on that. My concern, and part of the reason I actually went to Eleanor Health, Eleanor Health is a startup. It's 3 years old. It's founded by 3 women, 2 women of color and 1 queer. That to me in the tech space, it starts was my mind was blown. This is my dream. How is this possible? And it's a huge part of our core mission is we need to ensure that we're, really coming to everyone where they are. We need to have everyone have a voice at the table. And the things with AI that scare me and have always scared me is who's at the table making those decisions. You mentioned business models. Who are making those decisions? It tends to be a certain collection of people. And that really isn't the way the world works. And particularly, in health.
Well, it does way.
Well, it should not. It should not work that way. And I've argued many times that their short-sightedness is actually keeping them from a lot of rich data because there's a lot of fear about giving your data over, especially if you don't understand the technology or the AI, right, from our users. So it's a humongous issue. Huge issue. We see it all the time. For our members, we have a lot of people that will engage with our member experience because they don't know where their data is going. And this for us, we're talking about mental health and addiction treatment. But that's across finance, it's across like everything. So then that means that data that we're getting is only going to be from a certain section of people.
And Juhan, do you share that concern? Do you feel as though with this exponential growth, eventually it's going to be so democratic where it will? Because I mean, part of the theme is prediction.
We share a few similar angles. Is that part of what it's doing? These kind of technologies is it's decreasing the cost of intelligence. That is the basic, component of it, which is pretty rad, so that I can go and like query it. There is a component, which is a small chance this will happen, is what happens when there's an intelligence difference between two species. What typically tends to happen? Dominance or death. So look at what happened with the sea cow, right? You can Google that. You can Wikipedia it. We destroyed the sea cow because there were beautiful, dumb, gorgeous little animals that were loaded with fat and meat, right? So we wiped out the entire species. What did the Europeans come over and do to North America? They had a technological advantage. That is a kind of intelligence.
Yeah.
They wiped out cultures. So what I'm not saying
disease,
right? This sounds too Terminator, but like the idea is that when a service gets 100 times more intelligent, 10,000 times more intelligent, that is an order that gets scary quickly. So I'm not saying that's going to happen, but it's something we have to at least put on our radar.
Yeah, the conversation has to be had. The discussion is.
Yeah, we got to do shit about it. And the question is, do you do that through legislation, which I don't know how you exactly do that. Do that through data and data ownership, so your data is portable between algorithms. We don't have data ownership in this country. It's a tricky one.
Oh man, I'd keep this positive here. So let's make it really relevant to say, let's say you're hiring somebody for your team. Same question to both of you. Astrid, we'll start with you for this one. What do you say to this person in terms of and just speaking generalities here, in terms of integrating AI into the work that they're going to do? What do you say to them? The reason I say this is because I think specificity is so important in terms of, there might be people here who are looking for a new career, maybe switching jobs, whatever it may be. What might they want to know?
Yeah. So one of the things early on when I was working in AI and data that I really advocate for is the use of like a service design approach. So I tend to really push my teams to think of that, to think about the whole system and to think about all of the data that we have today versus the data we need to get, the data that we need to clean. I think understanding that map and that timeline for designers is really powerful because then you can be part of those conversations strategically. And also I found, that it can be really helpful when you're an organization to bring that to all the different leadership. So, marketing or a physician, understanding that framework is really helpful. And it can also be very beneficial and really great on a slide for investors because you are pulling out all that data and really sort of highlighting like, here's what we could do, but then also doing it ethically.
Right. So having really that kind of workable knowledge of what it is, and in particular for whatever industry that person may be.
Yeah, because each of those touch points we are designing for.
Yep. So standing by the sidelines probably isn't an answer.
No, definitely not.
Juhan, how about you? What would you say to interview setting, someone trying to work on your team? What do they need to know about AI? What's going to impress you?
Working. Is that what we're doing? I think there's one thing. I personally think that range of a human skill set is enormously important. You may find, and you're seeing in education once people get out, changing, it was mentioned before, their gigs. So they go deep into something during maybe undergrad or grad, and then they change up to a different kind of discipline and see something else. I think that there's actually a really good book that came out earlier this year called Range. So I'm paraphrasing. It's an excellent read for those in the design and engineering fields, so that they can see, I have to deal with a lot of different shit. I have to have a command of a lot of different things, but also see this through like a permeable membrane to other disciplines. And I think that's pretty critical for anyone going into this weird world of design, overrated world of design. But that's, for me, the first thing that you have to start to see. Then the idea of being a tool maker. If you're not building the tools that for other people and for yourself, then something's amiss. I think you still have to do that. That's getting back to my make thing. And the third is, ultimately, you're there to design with others, meaning like if you go, it's funny, the idea of designing in the field is so like, I'm at my home. I get to do that remotely. Oh yeah, I don't get to see how people use food stamps, or whatever whatever you're into, whatever you're designing. It's like this remote design BS. You should be, the people who get food, I'm just giving you an example of food stamps or Medicaid or mass, whatever you're doing. If you're not there with the human and they're not really the designer of the service, then what the hell? Then we're just coming in and overriding just using best practices, which GPT can do. Right? I'm being a little facetious. For like best practice stuff that someone was talking about 18F this morning, that's just going to get regurgitated, and basic UI, basic interfaces, basic software is going to be good enough for 80% of the shit out there. Right? So we have to be in the field seeing what the problem is, but then working with the people who are suffering the problem are the ones actually designing it. We're just shepherds.
Yeah, the co-design aspect is so critical for adoption and just understanding what the reality is.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a hypothetical question for you both. Time is flying. It's already 11.
So we done?
We'll open up in a minute. So let's say someone's interviewing you, you're interviewing them for a job, and they go back to the first question of the panel. They really impress you with understanding the human experience. They really impress you with a level of vulnerability. They're genuine, but the knowledge of AI isn't there. They're not using it yet.
It's okay.
That's okay?
Yeah. Most of the world doesn't know.
And even if you are known in the local scene, you're adopting AI, that's okay with you.
Yeah.
I think the curiosity and the hunger and humility to regurgitate trends from 10 years ago, I think. Yeah, that is most important. Absolutely.
Well, one more question here, and then we'll open it up for questions from the group. And Juhan, I think you got into this a little bit, so Astrid, we'll start with you. What's one piece of advice for people here who watch the recordings, new to the local scene or been here for a while and trying to, further their career? What would you tell them?
We're screwed?
Thank you, Juhan, for that positive comment.
It's going to sound like a prepared canned answer, but take advantage of these organizations. It's incredible. The AIGA Boston is huge, humongous. I'm on the board of UXPA Boston. Huge. There's so many people there that are really excited to talk about these things. And so really leveraging that. And I think, that's something that's been amazing about coming together as a community, as a design community, as a user research community, throughout all of this.
So that sense of community, getting involved.
Yeah.
And how much of that should be in person? How much should that be getting outside of your screen?
I don't know, but I have an answer because I know we're all trying to figure that out. Yeah. I mean, it's just amazing that we actually are in person.
The risk aversion gene is running hot right now across corporate dis-America. So I would, if anything, if you're just getting into it, you're getting your grad degree, you're a couple of years, your risk profile should be high in terms of the interestingness that you're trying to tackle. Hopefully you don't have a huge mortgage, you haven't spawned, you're outly open, right? So I would recommend highly to get out of, there's this whole lack of urgency there's this American bullshit exceptionalism that has taken over and softened our freaking wetware. So what I would do is try to get out of the no mission land of the Googles and the Metas and Netflixes of the world and go out and do something crazy buns, because that's where you're going to really move. And that's the one stupid piece of it, motivational bullshit that I can rattle out. Do not get comfortable. That is something that we do across our careers, and that is also a dumbing effect. How's that for like?
That's good. I actually have a couple more questions. I have a little more time than I thought. I really struggle with this next piece. Is it possible to get too comfortable if you're working from home all the time?
Yeah. I mean, what kind of question is that? I mean, of course it is.
Thank you again, you.
There are shit tons of studies though that say working at home, you're more efficient at home because you're your PJs or, just half up or whatever you're doing. Whatever you're into. So there is real data there that supports working at home. So rock onto that.
Yep.
But there is something about a forcing function for getting out, not necessarily to an office, because you want to put people before buildings in terms of your ethic, but you need to also just go out and see it, live it.
Yep. Astrid, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, same. I mean, right now, even this past week, I put together like a goal for my team to go out shadow inner clinics like once a month, if not more often. That it's just invaluable. There's no way that we could capture all of those nuances from home. There's just no way.
One last question. What other industries or emerging technologies aside from AI are you excited about right now, if anything?
Oh, okay. Well, because we swim in the healthcare dirty water, so I happen to think that what's happening right now is crazy amazing. We're going to have a vaccine for heart disease for cholesterol in probably 2 years. So that heart disease is something that you don't even see, right? We do a lot of work in cancer. I mean, there's, this is like how many percent? 20% of the healthcare GDP is in this 1 square mile around here. So a shit ton of that is in cancer. So we're going to solve it actually pretty in the next half generation. But things like heart disease, which you don't see, will also be solved. Like they're plaques, but they're actually good plaques, and people don't know about this. And we're going to have an injection, a vaccine for a lot of these conditions, which will be amazeballs. I think we'll have epigenetic reprogramming happening more and more, which will save our kids. Probably, it's too late for us. It's over. But for our, the kids coming now, I think have a chance of living to 120. Now, when I say that, and it sounds like sci-fi, but if you're watching Sinclair at Harvard, cure blindness, that is amazing. He's also now working in animal models, not just in Petri dish, on rejuvenation. So our mRNA rejuvenation. So you think you're gonna have a choice of living longer. Think about that for a second. Now, I don't want to live longer and worse quality of life. That sucks. But like the field has gone from sci-fi Star Trek BS to real science very quickly.
Where does design fit into that?
It fits in all sorts of places. Astrid talks about the ethic of design, the ethic of how this works, and how you roll something like this out. Who gets it, who does not. I mean, there's some obvious, starting pharma. Do you have money? Yes, no. That's a serious gate. But then how do you actually get the culture around the problem set as a design problem too, not just a governance problem? That's just one small.
And I mean, one of the things I think about even in pharma and all those things is there are infinite tools that are being used to develop all of those things, and who's designing that and who's explaining that. The industries or the roles that I'm super excited to talk to, while they might sort of sit a little bit in healthcare, but I think they're applicable beyond, is, social workers, patient advocates, patient educators, financial educators, learning designers, which is part of our forte. But I think, with this technology that is so complicated and people don't know what's going on underneath, people need to explain that. They're going to have to explain that. And that, I think, is a key aspect. So the people that are out there in the world, those experts that know how to explain really complicated things in plain language is so important. So genetic counselors, huge, humongous, such an incredibly important role because they're handling both extreme complexity, but also like a lot of sensitive data questions. So those types of people are the ones that I love talking with.
Well, I could talk to you guys for a long time. Let's open up to questions.
So I have a question about how AI is going to affect education. At my university, I've talked about it loosely with professors, but haven't had like a structure or anything to talk about AI. But if I'm like a 13-year-old just exiting middle school and thinking about going into woodworking, should I be thinking about AI or should I be worried about it?
It's a big, I feel like, I can point on this.
Look, did I? So the fact that you're thinking about 13-year-olds is excellent. No, that sounded wrong.
Thank you again, Juhan.
We tend to not think about early education nearly enough. How's that for a rephrase? And so rock on to thinking about, well, what is the next generation? How are they going to do it? So you mentioned two things in one stroke, which are actually pretty great. One is we have a huge trades problem in the country because you have a retirement of the 50 and 60-year-olds who have been a tiler, a woodworker, thank you, wallpaper, of course, who are getting out of the trade. And the backfill is near zero. It is scary. So so that you're also mentioning, do we need trade schools as part of like 2-year colleges? Yes, and more yes. In fact, that's part of the current White House, goals, if you want to think that's any good. But having 2-year colleges for students who are 17 and 18, 19 and 20 to go into trades. I think to answer your question about AI, I think woodworking and house building will use a ton of it in order to calculate load, in terms of calculate R values and how you build, and all this kind of stuff. I think it'll be fantastically helpful to have this in your pocket and you just show it. You're doing a real live thing on your iPad. Most contractors have an iPad, right? So you're taking using the optics on it, and it'll say, "Hey, your inspector is right on your iPad." Right, helping you build the thing. That is awesome. So we'll see more of that, but I think you bring up a 1-2 punch. It's pretty brilliant.
Other questions?
Hi. I think my question might be for Astrid, just because you talked a little bit more about inclusivity. So I'm really passionate about healthcare, specifically queer healthcare, being in a queer relationship, being a trans man. I guess my question is, how do you see AI affecting healthcare for queer people and folks in other underrepresented groups? And this might be a little racy, but given our political climate, have there been conversations around legal ramifications and what might pop up in the future, specifically for younger folks? Like, he had mentioned, 13-year-olds, the folks coming up and that are going to really be in this and really be impacted by these waves of change.
Yep. Love this question. It's a major reason why I'm at Eleanor Health is because it's very, very core to our entire ethos is making sure that everyone is part of that, those questions and those discussions, and we talk about them very openly. Not only just sort of the legal ramifications, but how it's emotionally affecting us. One of the things that we really talk a lot about is this concept of trauma-informed care. And that's once I fully was able to understand all of it, and we actually really do take that to heart at Eleanor. It's really just understanding that everyone does carry trauma with them, and that we really need to think about our language with everything. But particularly when it comes to data in this day and age, like, it's scary. It's very scary. Like, I design for data, and yet there are many times where I don't feel comfortable giving mine over. So, I think it's the role of designers, user researchers, service designers, to be that advocate in all of those conversations, and to always mention we need to consider all of our users, our entire, population, because right now, this comes up at Eleanor, we're reaching certain people, but we need to be reaching everyone. We always need to be reaching more people. We're hearing from certain people that they're having challenges with accessibility. For each of those people, there are like countless others that aren't even coming to us. And that's what keeps me up at night, is exactly that.
So you mentioned climate as a politic. What are one or two pieces of legislation you want passed?
Honestly, I wish I could answer that quickly. I mean, I'd like to see more things taken down off the ballots, There's really nothing that I can tell you that I want passed. I mean, I want freedom for LGBTQ folks. I don't know that I can name certain things that I want to see passed. There's more of a list of things that I don't want to see passed.
Okay, that's also a list. But I'm being serious. Like, it's something to think about and actually like write down for yourself. Like, if we really want a different kind of healthcare system, we say, you step foot on U.S. soil, you get healthcare.
Yes.
Okay, that is a kind, or universal primary care.
Sure.
Right. Someone mentioned UBI this morning. I don't think it'll ever be called UBI because of the hairs in the back of the neck of libertarians. Will go up and all of a sudden vibrate and will go right in their ass.
Thank you again.
It'll be well, we had a start of UBI with the child tax credit, right? And so I think that is a start. It'll be called something else. So the second rule might be decriminalize drug usage across the board. Who does that affect, right? So the third, maybe, I don't know, term limits, because how many decrepit IV wielding cats do we have on the Hill, right, that don't understand the concepts, right, and that also have entrenched interest. So again, as part of this thing is, what's your agenda, right? And your agenda needs governance. And what's the governance that you want to push? Because it's a righteous path.
Yeah.
Those are actually all on my list. I just thought you meant LGBTQ in general, and I was like,
those encompass
all of the yes.
Those encompass that and do a blanket freedom.
Great. Thank you so much.
Isn't part of that just when we started the conversation talking about, okay, where's the data coming from? What is AI learning from? Isn't that those policy issues, isn't that central, aside from regulating AI, but making sure that it works for everybody? Aren't those policy issues central for AI to really live up to the promise that it can be?
But I think policy is
You go ahead.
I mean, I would say absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, one of the areas that I should have mentioned also that I'm really passionate about is like designing for like civic services, like is so critical. And I know like in Boston, we are very fortunate to have like a very rich group of people that are rich in perspective, not rich, though maybe.
Well,
Also. But there is room, and there's a lot of room for designers to be a part of that conversation.
other questions? Charge it up.
Hi. So I kind of have a bit of an intersectional question. So as part of one of my graduating projects at Lesley University, I was focusing a lot on financial education and literacy, and you had mentioned that earlier. And I was curious about like any sort of intersections that you see between healthcare, mental health, behavior, financial education and literacy, things like that. Because I know from my perspective on it and viewpoint was also from the LGBTQ community. And I spent a lot of time like actually interviewing and talking with people about those things. But I was curious, like, what kind of overlap, if at all, you've seen, and where you feel it applies.
Humongous overlap. One of the areas that I'm super passionate about is, I don't know if this is the right term anymore, but is social determinants of health, but health being like your whole life. And so understanding sort of like all of those, what you're working with, what anyone is working with. So one of the biggest things in, financial and health literacy is just even understanding what your role, like, do you have any agency in understanding like what your rights are? Do you have access to people that can explain these things to you? It's awesome that you're doing that kind of work because it's so critical and something that we talk about a lot. Before I went to healthcare, I did in finance, sort of, doing like that sort of, understanding about financial literacy. And so there's so many similarities.
Let's other questions, everyone. It's a whole, we'll talk afterwards.
Is this thing on? Okay. So listening and thinking to what you guys are saying and stuff that I've read and other stuff that I've listened to, I feel like there's a 10,000 foot view that no one's really talking about. And it's sort of like, it's really kind of existential, right? So, I've been thinking about this, and it's sort of like, in my mind, it's almost like AI is going to be the atomic energy of the 21st century, right? Like, just like changes everything. And if you look at what happened in the 20th century with atomic energy, there were some good outcomes and some bad outcomes, right? And there's probably going to be with this too, and some of them may be bad, serious. But like, where's sort of like the philosophical and the ethical leadership coming from in all of this, in your view, if anywhere, in terms of like, okay, so like we've got this incredibly powerful new tool. What do we want to do as the human race? Like, what do we want our purpose to be moving forward? And like, how are we going to figure that all out? And like, who's really talking about that? I feel like we're all in the weeds with this. Anyway, I'm going to shut up now.
Do you want to?
Well, who was talking about it? There are actually quite a few. Rick Kurzweil, right? I mean, he's been around for time immemorial, and he occasionally gets on a Zoom and spouts off on about it. He's been in the AI business for 60 plus years. So he's got one very positive idea of where it's going. And in general, if you look at the 20th century, our standard of living across every human has dramatically gone up. Not for everyone equally, but in general, the boat has been rising. So if you talk to Ray, he's one person of many. There's another cat, Harry Sleeper, who's also like has a pretty good point of view on it. Also a crazy, lives in a cabin in the woods kind of thing. But I love him dearly. So there, you look at Peter Diamandis. These are all old white guys, by the way. Not great. But he's got another very overly positive way of looking at it without some of the downside. I think you need the yin to the yang to it. Now you're getting into a whole other conversation, which needs like peyote and things. But I think we're on a pretty good path. I don't think it's all doom and gloom. There is a good chunk that could destroy us. Like the atomic energy can still very quickly wipe out the planet. And it is still a threat we don't talk about at all.
That's right.
And so, which is nuts. And so, but what happens if you see the wildfire of adoption of these services, that's, on the same scale of potential. So we have to sort of balance these things. I don't know how to do it.
Yeah. There are groups like the Algorithm Justice League that came out of MIT, I think. It has, like a lot of different really important people talking about these things.
Frontiers of the Future, right? In Stanford, yeah.
Yeah. And then, I recently, in the last, over the pandemic, joined a book club that was reading Ruha Benjamin's The New Jim Crow, all about, being Black in technology. So incredibly important. I think we have a list of resources that we're going to be sharing. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, also there are frameworks that I think are really great. Like the Open Data Institute has like a data ethics canvas, kind of like a lean canvas. I'm all about those sorts of things. And it's really great. And people are building upon those things, which is really exciting.
Yeah, and we have time for one more question. And just to build off on what both of you said, is those are the resources to look at. Maybe not the CEOs who have a vested interest in what they're doing. That I think is really, really important. Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
One more question.
Hi, I work at a health plan, and I was wondering if you had any recommendations for how to transform the culture around data to facilitate user experience improvements.
You go. Yeah, start.
Okay. I mean, I have been in a lot of different places, like big enterprise places, and sometimes it just starts with like creating, a little group, like a guild or a group or a lunch and learn around, those topics. I think can be really beneficial. And then, of course, I mean, I'm always going to go to do user research in the field with the people that it affects and understand like what are some of the challenges. So much of my time in my career has been telling executives all of the data that they're not getting because they don't have the trust of the members, patients, users, which that's not the only reason why we do it. But sometimes when you're speaking to business people, data is money. So, that's how I've done it.
What's at Blue Cross or at now whatever behemoth you're at, what is their data use agreement with patients?
I would say that it is probably whatever the minimum required by federal law. I don't think that there has been a lot of intellection around data collection, and I think it's incredibly inconsistent depending on what platform you're currently using.
So that may be on the collection side, but it has been highly studied by the corporate hands of law at the company by design, because there's this thing called an extraction technique of our experiences that is the business model of most healthcare. So they're using patient data, and because they own it. So I would look at what the DUA says, and if you go to datauseagreement.org, I happen to know this, you can look at actually a more patient-friendly version of how you would approach that in law. Because, usually in governance and law, that's what dictates behavior sometimes. And in this way, it dictates corporate behavior, how they treat or collect data. So you may want to start at the atomic unit of that is the law surrounding how you collect data. And then you can say, okay, well, how do we go do this humanely?
Great. I want to thank you both. You be sticking around later to answer any questions? We'll be here later. Great. Well, thank you both. Appreciate it.
Thank you.